You don't realize your life is drifting until 5 years later you reach an unplanned destination. I won't pad this episode with build your future, stop scrolling, or with some vague idea like find your meaning. I just have a question to you. Why do you repeatedly act against your own long term interests while fully understanding their consequences? Why do you scroll, procrastinate, sleep at 3 a.m., eat Doritos, and skip workouts? You probably don't want to do these, but you're stuck in these routines despite knowing it's not right for you. And no matter how much you try to be more disciplined to stay more productive, you seem to drift off track. And this drift isn't just limited to your habits, it's happening in your mind too. You overthink, you become anxious, you lose rationality. You don't want to overthink or stay in this anxious state of mind. In fact, you hate it. You want to be happier, calmer, rational, and more disciplined. You do it for a day or two, but somehow you drift back to hours of scrolling, hours of television, a pack of chips, and routines you never wanted. All of this may seem random, but there's a deep underlying cause: the law of least resistance, the natural tendency to move towards the path of least resistance. You don't need discipline to be distracted, to procrastinate, to seek comfort, or to seek novelty or convenience, because these are low resistance states. These are lower effort states. There's a directional bias built into our behavior, a tendency towards lower effort states. Much of human action is simply momentum expressing itself through habits, impulses, reactions, convenience, dopamine loops, and conditioning. Because intentional action is expensive. Focusing on a task requires energy. Conscious thinking requires energy. Interrupting an impulse requires energy. These are higher effort states, and that's why we drift towards familiar routines even though we know they're destructive. We don't intentionally want destruction, we just naturally prefer familiarity. Like an example would be I just buy groceries from one specific shop, even though there are 10 shops on the way. But just because I'm familiar with that shop, I just prefer to stop there. Because repeated behavior becomes neurologically cheaper. While it helps in building habits, like with repetition, behavior gets easier and easier, but it often backfires when there's an instant gratification activity. And the important distinction is that lower resistance states are not necessarily pleasurable. People assume humans move towards happiness, but humans often move towards familiarity, ease, and predictability, even if those states create misery. Doom scrolling isn't enjoyable. You're having this constant thought in your mind like, I shouldn't be doing this. I should work out. I should focus on something important. But again, the path of least resistance. The easiest path is the natural path. Deep focus is unnatural. Consistency is unnatural. Discipline is unnatural. Long term thinking is unnatural. Delayed gratification is unnatural. I'm not saying that they are impossible, but they are effort based states. These are simply states you need to maintain. An unwanted outcome isn't one catastrophic event, it's the outcome of thousands of low resistance drifts. An unfit person is unfit because they chose low resistance paths again and again. If effort disappears, then where does your life move on its own? Towards distraction, towards stimulation, towards instant gratification, towards pleasure. That's simply the natural path. We do not decide, we follow familiarity, and without conscious resistance, the system drifts automatically. But why? Why do humans naturally move towards distraction instead of focus, towards comfort instead of growth? To understand this, you need to understand something deeper than psychology. If you organize your room today, it will look clean on day one, but within a week or two, it will become messy again. To keep things in an organized state, energy is required. The amount of disorder always increases unless effort or energy is put to maintain order. And while order requires energy, it is also less probable. Order is highly specific. Disorder has infinite possibilities. A watch requires components arranged in a very specific manner. You can focus only by focusing, but you can be distracted through multiple streams. Maintaining structure is effortful because you are resisting a statistical tendency towards disorder. That's the asymmetry. Building a healthy body takes years of effort, but losing it can happen within months. Building trust can take years, but destroying it takes seconds. Writing a book may take years, but deleting that, it takes just a few seconds. Creation is narrow. Destruction has countless pathways. Focus is relatively narrow, while distractions have infinite entry points. You don't think a day before, like, I'll scroll for 3 hours tomorrow. High order states require coordination across multiple dimensions, while low order states behave like gravity. If someone fell off the building, you can't blame gravity, because gravity does not have emotions. It doesn't love or hate someone. Whether it's president or us, it just behaves in the same manner. Gravity won't make the president float, or it won't make us fall at higher speed. Its job is to naturally pull things downwards. In the same way, some behaviors naturally pull you downwards, not because you're weak, but because they are gravitationally easier, like doom scrolling, binge watching, or consuming hyper-processed food. The natural progression is from order to disorder. But, and this is crucial, humans can locally create order through energy expenditure. Cities, art, science, architecture, music, philosophy, relationships, all are forms of order. They exist because humans continuously apply structure against the natural drift. The natural direction of unattended systems is drift. For most of evolutionary history, unnecessary effort was biologically expensive. A person who wastes energy for no reason was less likely to survive, which means the brain evolved with mechanisms to automate behavior, minimize friction, predict patterns, and conserve metabolic expenditure whenever possible. The brain constantly searches for cheaper behavioral pathways. Once a behavior becomes repeated enough, the nervous system makes it automatic. This is why routines become easier and easier over time. Playing a guitar, typing on a keyboard, or driving a car becomes easier and easier. And this also explains that why destructive behaviors are so easier to fall into over time. Repetition reduces cognitive cost, regardless of whether the behavior is beneficial or harmful, because the brain doesn't distinguish strongly between good habits and bad habits. If you train every morning, it becomes easier and easier. It becomes engraved into your neural pathway. If you constantly check social media, then that slowly moves into automation. Over time, the behavior becomes easier to initiate and harder to interrupt. This is why you feel like you are being pulled towards certain behavior, because in many ways, you are. The behavior becomes deeply engraved into your neural pathways, and that's why change, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, requires effort. Because new behavior requires conscious energy investment. As an example, if you want to play a song on guitar, a melody on guitar, at first you'll find it extremely difficult to build a melody or to maintain the rhythm. But as you keep on putting more and more reps, you become good at it. And now you can play it even with your eyes closed. Growth feels effortful not because you don't want growth, but because unfamiliarity, that randomness, increases your cognitive energy expenditure. Consciously, the brain processes at almost 10 bits per second. Unconsciously, it processes over 1 billion bits per second. That's a straight up 100 million times more than conscious processing, and this is why it's difficult to overwrite unconscious processing. And in the modern environments, it becomes dangerous because high calorie stimulation and low effort rewards are available in a breath. We are drifting because we are living inside systems specifically designed to make drift effortless. Observe anything around you, and you'll find that most of the things are designed for convenience. They are intentionally designed for convenience. The modern formula is to maximize reward and minimize effort. Every individual can now obtain novelty, calories, entertainment, social validation, outrage, distraction, and emotional escape instantly and continuously. Friction acts as a natural regulator on human behavior. And when that is removed, human behavior becomes uncontrolled. And that's exactly what you see now. Nobody wants to scroll, nobody wants to eat those high fat foods. In fact, people want to quit that, which means that low resistance states are no longer occasional temptations, but they are becoming environmental defaults. Our biological impulses are being capitalized. Hyperpalatable foods are engineered combinations of salt, sugar, fat, texture, and aroma designed specifically to maximize consumption. A bag of chips isn't just something out of factory. It's engineered precisely to maximize satisfaction. And if you peek at the digital environments, infinite feeds, constant pings, and autoplay are crafted for passive continuity. You realize it or not, we subconsciously compare ourselves to these highly curated online presentations available on the internet. We like to imitate someone's talking style, someone's personality, someone's aesthetic, but we forget that it's mostly a crafted display. In fact, what you're watching right now is a crafted display. It will be edited. It will be, there's a light in front of me, there's a backdrop behind me, there's a microphone. Everything is a crafted intentional display. So while internet is a great library of information, it's also an endless stream of distractions, and we are structurally biased towards those distractions. The caveat is an occasional distraction. Humans have always experienced laziness, temptation, and pull towards pleasure. The problem is when these states become your default, because after a point, pleasure without effort just becomes numb. Scrolling becomes numb. Fast food doesn't taste as good as before. But even after accounting that, you're still being pulled towards that because they are engineered so precisely to hook you. You scroll even if it doesn't feel pleasurable because of novelty. You consume fast food even though it doesn't feel as pleasurable as before because that gives you an instant stimulus. You post on social media because that's a shortcut to validation. Modern systems are designed to make unconscious living feel normal. One of the most deceptive aspects of the human drift is that it's silent and it's compounding. You witness a breakdown, a crisis, or a visible failure, but that breakdown is happening for months or maybe years. 1 hour of scrolling changes nothing. One delayed responsibility changes nothing. One avoided conversation changes nothing. One night of poor sleep changes nothing. But repeated drifts don't stay linear. Drift compounds asymmetrically, or you can say drift compounds exponentially. Repeated actions feel nothing until the final outcome appears sudden. Construction demands visible effort, but deterioration happens invisibly. Relationships, for example, do not collapse in one specific argument. They collapse through repeated emotional distance, through avoidance, through unspoken resentment. It's usually comfortable to perform peace than to confront the truth. The collapse rarely feels destructive in the moment. It often feels comfortable, convenient, and harmless, which means drift rarely registers emotionally as threat while it's happening. Humans are exceptionally good at noticing catastrophic change and exceptionally poor at detecting slow erosion. And this is dangerous because while drift happens passively, our identity is actively being reshaped. Let me tell you something I have been trying to improve on. So, 2 years ago, I was at my hometown. I used to live at my hometown. And there, my sleep routine was perfect. Like sleep at 9, wake up at 5. But as I shifted to this new place, I have been struggling to maintain that routine. My sleep routine slowly began to drift. And because I didn't put much of the conscious effort to improve that, I just drifted off track. My habit of sleeping at 9 p.m. fell off. My identity shifted. So the damage is not merely external outcomes, but internal orientation. Like, for example, overthinking begins off with seemingly small events, but as it repeats, you become habitual to it. And now, no matter how much you try to stay more positive, to, not overthink, to stay clear in your mind, you drift towards that. You just feel because the pattern of overthinking is now engraved into your identity. The mind gradually becomes familiar with anxious states. So the point is, without conscious structure, life drifts towards disorder. And it doesn't just affect productivity, it affects your self relationship. You see yourself differently. Your mind begins to automate or normalize repeated actions. Constant exposure reduces conscious awareness. Tiny deviations compounded over years create radically different outcomes. And because drift, disorder, entropy, whatever you want to name it, is the natural state, majority are just stuck in that. You rarely see someone who's really focused and disciplined. And that's why being distracted is now considered normal. Cultural normalization hides individual decline. We fear catastrophic failures while ignoring slow downfalls. But these slow downfalls are more dangerous because they remain invisible for a long period of time, like a cancer cell. The greatest danger is unconscious adaptation. Consciousness is fragile. The moment you lose intention, it fragments. It drifts off track. It defaults to baseline. And the baseline is actions that demand the least effort from your side. You drift to midnight. You wake up after sun has passed your window. You feel anxious. Your screen time bumps automatically. Behavior becomes passive. An uncomfortable emotion arises and distraction begins automatically. Boredom hits and stimulation is sought after automatically. Criticism appears and defensiveness emerges automatically. And more information, which most people are chasing right now, doesn't really help that. Billions of people know what they have to do. They have to focus on their work, study, work out, have a clear mind. But they fail to do so. Just having more information changes nothing. The modern crisis isn't informational, it's attentional. The ability to direct attention for extended span is the new skill set. But the reason it's so rare is because humans naturally gravitate towards instant rewards. Like exercising isn't just difficult because it requires effort, it's difficult because it doesn't give you instant rewards. And the same applies for focused work, emotional discipline, or meditation. Modern systems reward passivity because it's easier to capture, predict, and monetize. Passive living means continuously reacting to external predictions, impulses, moods, and trends. So, how to not end up as a passive participant? Become an active participant. Active living means consciously directing attention towards chosen values, actions, and pursuits you really care about. I'm not pointing to the general rhetoric like focus on your goal, it's important, even though it may seem like that. What I'm saying in a nutshell is that life has dimensions, and those dimensions should not become invisible when you're lost in passivity. And most importantly, living passively has never been a great experience in any point of history. Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. One of the deepest illusions that we carry is that once I become clear, things will become easier. But it generally doesn't happen. Your values and intentions aren't waiting in your memory. Disorder happens everywhere. In your body, in the mind, in relationships and civilizations, literally everywhere. The greatest individual duty can be maintaining structure. Because the moment attention drifts, routines, habits, and thoughts turn towards lower resistance states. Your routine becomes myths. Your habits become thoughts like I'll do it tomorrow. Your mind drifts towards survival level states like anxiety, fear, etc. And these get amplified in the modern environments because the problem is deeper than just distraction. And logically, we can't just throw the blame on the external stimulation. The caveat isn't that we are hyperstimulated, it's that they have begun to feel normal. I personally consume almost zero sugar or unhealthy foods, so whenever I'm at a social event, everyone in my table are with some sort of flavored noodles, some unhealthy food, and a drink with 20 grams of sugar in it, and I am there with a bit of rice, a bit of vegetable, and a glass of plain water. Some appreciate it, some make jokes like this person wants to live for 200 years, but the point is, that kind of food consumption has now become abnormal, and eating those high fat, high sugar food, those high palatable foods have become normal, and the same pattern exists everywhere. Like sleep deprivation is seen as moral superiority, constant stimulation is treated as relaxation, emotional instability is concluded as personality. So there are two forces acting at the same time. The first is pull towards lower effort states, that's drift towards disorder, and the second is the push from society because that drift itself is normalized. An environment saturated with distraction, novelty, outrage, trends, and random consumption, identity itself becomes unstable. So, in many ways, discipline is less about achievement and more about maintaining authorship over the mind. Because discipline is easy, staying disciplined is difficult. Discipline has now become a set of rules like wake up at 5 am, do this, do that, meditate, read a book. But discipline is about structure. Of course, it has other dimensions like fulfillment, but for this discussion, let's focus on the structural part. Everything meaningful is a structural unit. Cities require infrastructure. Music requires rhythm. Language requires grammar. Aesthetics require symmetry. Relationships require emotional continuity. Civilizations require shared structure. Without structure, energy dissipates. So, freedom or unlimited openness, which is probably the fantasy for most people, is not really freedom or fulfillment. Somewhere it just ends up dissolving into external attractions. A mind without intentional boundaries eventually dissolves into its environment, feeds, adds, trends, and society begins to shape goals, desires, and choices. The individual internally experiences life as choice, while large portions of consciousness are externally conditioned. The mind constantly falls back into efficiency, familiarity, automation, and reactive behavior, and this drift cannot be eliminated entirely. No one is entropy proof, even though people on the internet pretend to be like that. Everyone just shows you a highlight. Your attention, focus, thoughts, goals, habits, and routines are structures you need to maintain, not milestones to be achieved. The most potent skill someone can develop is self control. Now, I'm not pointing to the vague fantasy like becoming a monk with zero impulses. I'm not going to say that meditate for 3 hours, nor am I about to give you quick fixes like fix your self control in 7 days or something of that sort. Whatever I'm about to say is just an observation. The root of every drift is loss of control. Loss of control implies that the mind begins the motion before you choose, and also that motion is so strong that your effort cannot fight it. I randomly met a person from Saudi and we were talking about his addiction to smoking. The most important thing that he said was that I do want to quit, but doesn't matter how much I try, I just end up with another pack. That's a behavior becoming so strong that even conscious resistance fails. So, if conscious resistance fails, then why did I point to self control? Because self control isn't about brutal discipline. Self control is about weakening the grip of external seductions in the mind. If external attractions fail to move you, that's the ultimate form of self control. Which means the real battle was never productivity, motivation, or better routines, which most people think. The real battle is the mind that eats, thinks, wanders, and acts against your will. Because if you're trying to be disciplined with a thought in your mind like, I'm missing all the fun, that's not discipline, that's suppression. Someone who doesn't consume fast food or processed food isn't thinking in their mind like, oh, I'm missing all the taste. That person's thinking, I care about my health. And that value system is strong enough to override the external attraction. You don't need to fight your addictions or bad habits. You just need to be stable enough that they fail to move you. The antidote to drift is a mind that's stable. The foundation of your life is your value system. You need a stable worldview. You need a stable identity. You need a personal philosophy.